It's Wednesday, September 18th, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the Futures Lab studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me are my colleagues Monique Luisi and Ernest Perry. On our program this week, remembering Cokie Roberts, legendary journalist and political commentator that you heard here on NPR and KBIA. We're going to talk about the dangers of e-cigarettes and vaping. They're becoming more evident, and now one major media outlet says it won't accept advertising from Juul. We'll talk about whether others are likely to follow. And his was probably the shortest Saturday Night Live tenure ever. We'll talk about the hiring and firing of Shane Gillis. There's a lot more that hopefully we'll get to before our time is up today, but I want to start this week by talking about an essay, a tweet, and a book about new allegations of sexual misconduct against Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Over the weekend, The Times published an essay written by two of its reporters under the heading of News Analysis. It was based on reporting that was done for their new book, The Education of Brett Kavanaugh, an investigation. And it went into great detail about the culture shock that Deborah Ramirez experienced at Yale, where she later had alleged Kavanaugh, who was a fellow student, exposed himself to her during a drunken dorm party. The essay goes on to say they discovered a different incident the reporters did in which another classmate, well-known attorney Max Steyer, said he saw Kavanaugh with his pants down at a different party, forcing his genitals into the hands of another female student. But the essay didn't mention that that woman wouldn't corroborate the story and wouldn't agree to an interview, and that her friend said she didn't remember it that way. So next, the New York Times did what media outlets around the world do to promote content. They put a link out on Twitter, and that tweet has been deleted because it was just bad. It said having a penis thrust in your face at a drunken dorm party may seem like harmless fun, but when Brett Kavanaugh did it to her, Deborah Ramirez says it confirmed she didn't belong at Yale in the first place. We can get to that tweet in a minute, but what this shows here appears to be a pretty big mishandling of what may have been the burying of a really big news story.
I really don't understand what the New York Times saw in sending that tweet out. I mean, if they were going to promote their follow-up to what the Washington Post had done, I think that there are many other ways in which they could have done that. And I think it also takes away from the larger story, which is how much investigation had been done prior to the Senate hearings, the confirmation hearings for Justice Kavanaugh. There were always these other allegations out there that there were supposedly other instances in which he was engaged in the kind of behavior that did come out during the confirmations, but I wouldn't say none of that was explored, but it wasn't gone into the depth. And now here we are, a year, 2 years later, and these things start to come out in this book and these other articles and other things. So where do we go from here? I have no idea. And all the talk of a possible impeachment of a Supreme Court justice, I don't know if we're at that point yet, or whether we will even get to that point.
And even if we do get to that point, this could be dangerous, because even though I understand the desire to see somebody, especially if they're coming from the angle that Kavanaugh is a bad dude, somebody go down and use all the tools at people's disposal. But the problem is with sloppy investigation and sloppy reporting, that what could happen is that this could be used to promote his case, Kavanaugh's case, in support of him and those who support him. And it could actually end up being counterproductive.
Which is a big point here. And we talked a little bit about that last week and bringing these stories back and some of the backlash that has hit the Me Too movement because some of that reporting has been maybe a little bit sloppy or a little bit quick to rush to judgment. I mean,
you also run into you talk about the issue of the woman not wanting to come forward, maybe not remembering things quite the way that it was described by this person who allegedly saw this incident happen at Yale 20, 30 years ago or longer. And so now you run into this he said, she said, and a difficulty in corroborating the facts surrounding these particular incidents. And it brings up what Monique was talking about, which is, that in itself can do damage and further victimize people who really don't want to be involved in this investigation.
I want to talk about that tweet for another second or so, because there was something that tweet itself elicited as much reaction as the story, both how it was worded, the idea of a story being buried. And yesterday afternoon, Marie Tessier, who is a former RJI fellow, a grad of our program, and also the lead comments editor at the New York Times, posted something on her Facebook. It was an interview with James Dow, who is the deputy opinion page editor at the New York Times, kind of explaining some of the process that went into both the publication of the essay and then the crafting of the tweet. And one of the things that Marie said that struck me was that no one that she knows at the New York Times would write a tweet like that. And my first thought was, well, but someone did.
I just
Someone
wonder who was the target audience for this tweet, because I'm like, since when does that sound like harmless fun, what they were talking about? But then if you think about, I'm thinking about fraternity movies in the 90s and stuff like that, there's this whole culture of hazing and stuff that we would have to unpack to go deeper and deeper into this. So maybe that's what they were trying to get at, but the case in point is this was a tweet failure. Hashtag fail.
Hashtag fail. Okay. Yesterday morning, just as I was sitting down to produce our show, we got word that legendary journalist and political commentator Cokie Roberts had died at the age of 75 of breast cancer. ABC's Robin Roberts offered this as part of an online tribute.
Until next week, that's this week.
From there, she would become a staple of ABC News political coverage, interviewing presidents, politicians, and first ladies, embodying the idea of journalistic integrity and female empowerment.
I hate to say it, John, but it's a female thing. Women do work together a lot.
Much more so than their husbands.
Much more so than men.
Thank you.
She would write several New York Times bestsellers recounting the untold and remarkable contributions of women in American history.
When I started out in the world of work, it was illegal for women to become generals or admirals. So there's a huge change in the years that I've been plowing this turf.
Received countless awards, be cited as one of the 50 greatest women in the history of broadcasting, and hold more than 30 honorary degrees, inspiring students with words at commencements all across the country.
You must look at the institutions of government, politics, business, the academy, and journalism, and hold them accountable to the people they are supposed to serve.
Her last byline, ironically enough, was part of her syndicated column last week that she shared with her husband. And under it was the headline, "Truth Tellers Are Heroes," looking at the need for always calling and holding our leadership accountable. Cokie Roberts was somebody who paved the way for all of us who came after her, often referred to as one of the four foremothers of NPR, still heard on this public radio station weekly, and somebody who's being remembered for her sense of humor and the way that she was able to take the inside knowledge that she had about what went on in the halls of Congress as the daughter of two members of Congress and really relate it and make it relatable to the general public in a way that was fun, but also really had the insight.
Yeah. I didn't know her personally, but she's a Washingtonian like myself. So it was really cool to kind of see her like growing as I was growing up. And it would have been cool if we had grown up at the same time. We could have been friends maybe, but who knows? But, it was just nice to see someone who could be a woman who's so human, like you're saying, so kind, so authentic, pave the way for so many journalists today.
I mean, I would say one of the things that I admired about Cokie Roberts was she had the ability to sort of diffuse a situation, a tense situation, as a reporter, as an interviewer, but still ask the poignant question, the important question, and get an answer from the people that she was interviewing, and that's unique in terms of journalism. Very few journalists have that ability to be able to do it in that sort of a way, and I think that's what gave her the ability to be able to sort of transcend a lot of what happens to network anchors or network reporters who don't come across as prima donnas, don't come across as the star. She was able to sort of walk in that same mode that you would say would be not so much a Barbara Walters, but say a Ted Koppel, or even to a certain extent a Peter Jennings, who she worked with at ABC News.
Well, and yesterday too, through some work that I've done here at the journalism school, I have gotten to know people who work in the Washington, D.C. bureau of ABC News, and was speaking with one of our alumni yesterday who was saying that people there were crushed, that the women in that newsroom had been mentored and raised journalistically and professionally by her, and for the youngest in that newsroom to really see how people our age, people who are in kind of that Gen X range, were affected by her loss, that they felt that ripple coming down in seeing their mentors shaken by this.
And that is something powerful in the sense that we can see that when we do good work, our legacies can live on and live past us and continue to raise up good work.
And that was exactly what I said to her yesterday when we were messaging back and forth, is that will be Cokie Roberts' legacy, that you're seeing the effect that she had, and you will become the third generation in that. So every morning and every evening, I see it walking through the Hit Street garage here on campus. Discarded Juul cartridges everywhere. And in the past few weeks, the number of stories that are coming out about young people suffering sudden onset pulmonary illnesses and showing the lung function of people in their 70s and 80s, it's scary. And for the past few years, it seems like e-cigarettes and vaping have been marketed as the safer alternative to smoking tobacco products, as a means to quit cigarette smoking. Last week, I saw a full-page ad in one of our local papers doing just that, promoting Juuling to baby boomers as a step-down product. In the past month or so, we've seen calls from both the left and the right to begin immediate regulation of these products. And until now, they've been largely untested. CNN has made a move, not allowing Juul or other e-cigarette products to purchase advertising going forward. Network spokespeople say they'll leave the door open to perhaps accepting that advertising in the future should these products be proven to not be harmful. Monique, you research health communication issues. Talk for a minute about how this decision could perhaps influence people who are either using them now or considering taking them up.
This is a very complicated question, and doing research is complicated. This question is even more complicated than that. First, thinking about tobacco, that's one thing I'm thinking about first.
Yeah.
The connection between the global epidemic of tobacco-related lung cancer was established as early as the 1940s. But it wasn't until the Nixon administration and Congress in the 1970s that tobacco ads were banned from television and radio. And then it wasn't until the 80s when smokeless tobacco was banned. So this is happening very quickly. And CNN is making a move. But I think another question we need to ask is, are the media outlets, I'm thinking social media, but are the other media outlets who are targeting the primary users of e-cigarettes going to also follow in step? I think that we're dealing with a multi-pronged issue here. We're dealing with the media that are advertising this product. We're dealing with a potential health crisis situation. And we're also dealing with an addictive substance, nicotine. So it's going to take a lot of social events to kind of make this roll forward. And it's going to take a lot more investigation. I don't have the answers.
I think you made a point in terms of the three prongs that appear to be sort of coalescing here. And one of them that I think is really driving this is the fact that you've got young people showing up at hospitals who are suffering from the kinds of illnesses that you see in long-term smokers, and they just started on this months or years ago. That, I think, is going to be the catalyst, or that may have been the catalyst for why CNN took the initiative that it did, and you will have others, because the backlash, not so much from the government, but the backlash from the public itself can do more damage to a media's brand than what the government can do, and I think that's where the push is coming from on this.
And that depends, though, too, because if you have people saying, though, that, it happened to those six people, now 6 or 7 people who've now died, that won't happen to me. If you have enough people with that mentality, then it won't change anything. I hope nobody else dies from this.
But to me, also the problem is that I do think that the government should play a role in this, because now the fact that the government is saying, okay, we're going to take a look and potentially crack down on this advertising, especially as it relates to the flavored Juul. I mean, the flavored e-cigarette use, and whether or not that's having an impact on young people and children who could possibly pick this up. That may be where you start to have the catalyst for where the government comes in.
And this scares me, because I've already seen backlash already on social media where people are saying that the government is presenting cases from people who got their Juuls or their the cartridges from back alley things, and these weren't actually the ones that you would buy in the store. So people are already saying, no, these studies are not legitimate. There's no danger.
Well, there are people who are getting sick and dying, so there's danger there. Monique, I didn't realize when I was asking you to sit in with us this week for Kathy that I was going to be competing with other radio stations who wanted to talk to you this week about health, science, and messaging in decisions that are being made. You spent some time yesterday on a radio station in Topeka talking about some of your research. Share that information with us too.
Yeah, so when I was first a student at the University of Kansas in my doctoral program, an article came across my newsfeed saying that Kansas had tied for the lowest rate of adolescent HPV vaccination in the nation, and
which would probably be a not good thing.
No,
right?
That's not
when you want to be listed.
That's not the list you want to be on.
Right.
So, but what it did do was inspire me for a study that I began back then, looking at whether or not social media exposure to HPV messages was correlated to believing that HPV vaccines were scary or not effective or so on. And what I found among my results were that mostly there were women leading this conversation, but also that people who had reported seeing information about the HPV vaccine on social media were more likely to believe that the vaccine could kill their children. Which is really scary if you think about it, because it really lends to how misinformation is being spread about. But not only that, but how effective misinformation can be. It's not that people are intentionally, in many cases, trying to spread misinformation, but if your family or friend or somebody you trust is sharing this information, you're more likely to believe in it.
So one of the things when I asked you to share this with us today on the show that you had said to me was that the news cycle was scooping the academic publishing cycle. So tell our audience when they can read more about this and when this study of yours is going to be published.
So this will be in the Kansas Journal of Medicine in February 2020.
Okay, so
got a while to wait there. Yeah.
So the folks in Topeka scooping the academic journal. But I wanted to make sure if you were telling people in Kansas about this, I wanted to be sharing that with our audience.
Thank you.
So a couple of entertainment-related stories I want to ask both of you about, including what has to be the shortest tenure of a Saturday Night Live cast member ever. Friday, 3 new cast members were announced for the show's 45th season, including its first ever Asian cast member. I'm tongue-tied all of a sudden. His name is Boeing Yang, and it's the cast member who was announced and then fired that people are really talking about. Shane Gillis is a comedian who had used a racial slur several times on his podcast. And when this came out following the announcement Friday, the backlash was harsh. If you're watching our program on TV or online, you can see his reaction to that now, saying he's a comedian who sometimes pushes the lines a little bit. Comedians do that. NBC and Saturday Night Live are coming up with their own apologies, saying that the vetting process here had failed them. I don't know. I look at that and say most people found this within hours using a pretty simple Google search, but it never came up for NBC or Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, I think both Gillis and Saturday Night Live, I think both of their reasoning or their excuses or their comments afterwards leave you sort of scratching your head. When you say that, you're pushing boundaries, well, I don't see how using those kinds of slurs in the way that he did it, because it wasn't as part of a one of his comedy routines.
No, it was part of the normal conversation. Like if we were to start throwing slurs around here, which we would not do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that, I think, is where the problem lies, because it wasn't that he just used it once. He used it several times, and it wasn't just in his blog. It was also in interviews that he was doing with other people that happened to show up on YouTube. That's a problem, okay? Now, when you go to Saturday Night Live, the problem there is, what kind of vetting were you doing? I mean, all you had to do was a normal Google search and you would have found this stuff.
Your average 12-year-old could have done that.
Absolutely. I mean, so who's doing the vetting? That's the person that should have also been fired. Because, I mean, you should have been able to find this and then make a decision about what you were going to do. And what bothers me here is that you didn't do that. You made this hire, then you had to pull it back. It taints the show, and it also taints the other two individuals who you also named. What happened to the love that they're supposed to be getting?
So we have the first ever Asian cast member in Boeing Yang. I had received an email from another publication that the other woman is a Jewish American, that there are all of these different opportunities for diversity, which I want to bring up in a second with one that is kind of, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But we're not talking about them.
Right.
Yeah, it's taking the thunder out of what's going on. Like you said, they're losing love over somebody who messed up. And why can't he just say he messed up? Why is it that I was pushing the line?
Saturday Night Live going to miss having Leslie Jones on there as we talk about those 2 steps forward and 1 step back.
Absolutely. But, to be honest with you, I'm not surprised, because this happens in Saturday Night Live. I mean, people get fame and they move on and they do other projects and that sort of thing. So I'm not really surprised by that she moved on. You never know what's going to happen with the new cast members and how they fit into that. So I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that.
So this month marks a milestone for NBC. Can you believe it's been 25 years since this aired?
There's nothing to tell. It's just some guy I work with.
Come on. You're going out with the guy. There's got to be something wrong with him.
So does he have a hump and a hairpiece?
Wait, does he eat chalk? Just because I don't want her to go through what I went through with Carl.
Okay, everybody relax. This is not even a date. It's just 2 people going out to dinner and not having sex.
Sounds like a date to me.
So that was the opening scene from the sitcom Friends, which turns a quarter of a century old this month. 1994, it was added to the Thursday must-see TV lineup with Mad About You, Seinfeld, and ER. Actually, ER and Mad About You were added in that same season. I'm going to come clean right now and tell you I am probably one of the only Gen Xers around who really doesn't like the show Friends and can't seem to get excited about this anniversary the way it's being marketed.
Yeah, I'm not a particular fan of the show. I mean, I watched several episodes of it, just couldn't.
You can't escape it, frankly.
Yeah, you can't
between
escape it.
Syndication, between streaming, it is kind of everywhere.
Right, and I just couldn't get into it. I mean, I think part of the reason for me was that everything seemed to happen either in their apartments or in this one coffee shop in New York. And it's one of those things, like, you're talking about one of the largest cities in the world, one of the most cosmopolitan, diverse cities in the world. And all you guys do is hang out in your house and in these coffee shops, and there's very little diversity in any of these spaces.
Had one black friend who was temporary.
Yeah, and that was toward the end of the show when it was headed toward,
but they had a black friend.
Right.
I'm being sarcastic.
I have a confession to make since we're making confessions.
Yes.
I've never seen a single episode of Friends.
Yeah, but you're the youngest person sitting at the table too. So.
But you know what? If you were to talk to a bunch of our students, though, it has had a second life on streaming, and there is this cult of personality that has built up around it that has led to these pop-up shops, the Central Perk coffee shops, or the touring couch going to different locations.
Allusions to Ross and Rachel and whomever these, I assume, decent individuals. I don't know. I've never seen a single episode.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if they were decent. You can go and read on our links blog some of the ways that this show didn't necessarily hold up well over time, and some of the storylines even that the creators of the show regret these 20-some-odd years later. Before we go, a story that, Earnest, we were pretty sure we were going to be talking about eventually on this program. It was just going to be a matter of time. MoviePass, that subscription service that gave people movie tickets good across the country, it ceased operation this weekend. This business model never really made sense to me. It started out where you paid $10 a month, and at the very beginning, you could go see one movie a day for $10 a month.
Right.
Here we are a year and a half, 2 years later, and it's kaput.
Yeah, and I remember we had this conversation with Mike.
Several times. There was no way this was going to last.
And we sort of looked at Mike and were like, there's no way this is going to happen. They're going to lose money. And eventually, they're going to have to pull the plug. And here we are, and they're pulling the plug because, you just hit.
Monique's making the sad face over there. Why are you making the face?
This is relatively news to me.
So Monique too is our avid moviegoer, right? You probably go to the movies maybe once or twice a week, if not more often.
Yeah, and my husband goes even more than that. And so we had, I guess past tense now, MoviePass, but also we're signed up with the Regal subscription program, and I think he had probably signed up for another. I can't remember, but yes, with people wanting to see movies as much as they want to. The old models of business aren't sustainable, apparently. So now movie companies are going to have to figure out how to compete not only with each other, but also with streaming services and also with movies being released direct to DVD and streaming more quickly.
Well, and if there is one thing that did come out of this MoviePass, shall we call it experiment, is the Regal and the AMC programs that you're talking about that in some cases people are subscribing to as a result. It did serve as a disruptor.
Yeah, I think it did. It pushed the movie theaters themselves to start thinking about ways in which they can sort of bring down the cost as much as they possibly can without sort of losing at least the market share. And I think you bring up a good point about the streaming. That's gonna really be could be the end of movies as at least I knew it as an old guy.
Okay, well, we are out of time for this week. I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. Read more about each of the topics we talked about today on our links blog. You can find that under both the programs and podcast tabs at kbia.org. We're also available wherever you get your favorite podcast downloads, including iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle there is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program again, leave us comments or questions, see previews of what we'll be talking about next week, and more. Thanks to RJI's Travis McMillan for directing the show, Aaron Hay for handling the audio, and Tim Pilcher for our original theme music.